now see the record notice appearing. So yeah, welcome everybody. Today's talk is Amalia Sabiescu on Communicative, Assemblages, Agency and Social Change. Amalia is Senior Lecturer in Media and Creative Industries, affiliated with the Institute for Creative Futures at Loughborough University, London. She's an interdisciplinary communications scholar with a research agenda at the interstices of cultural education and media studies. Her research in communication and global inequalities explores the dynamics between communication practices, access to information, and processes of empowerment and change in disadvantaged communities. Amalia also has extensive experience in research with museums, cultural institutions, and local communities on the role of digital media in cultural heritage transmission, socio-cultural change, and contemporary cultural practice. So thanks so much, Amalia, for agreeing to join us to share your work today. And I will now give you the Zoom floor. As always, everybody, please post questions or comments during the talk in the chat, and we'll have time for discussion at the end. Over to you, Amalia.
Thank you very much, Julian. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. So I will share from my recent research, in a sense, because these theoretical reflections are yet to be published, many of them. But it is also long-term research in the sense that I've been working on communication and social change and the role of agency for many years now. So these are the questions that are guiding my talk, and the talk is going to be divided in two parts. The first one addressing the first question and the second one addressing the second question. The first question being, what is the role of communication in building agency for change in underserved and underrepresented communities? And the second question is focusing on method. So I'm asking, how can we as researchers deepen our understanding of these processes, and what difference do our research methods make? So at the end, perhaps in the last 5-10 minutes, I'm going to invite you to share also your thoughts on method, why methods are quite important when we seek to theorize communication and social change. Let me start by telling you a little bit about the trajectory of the concepts that are relevant directly to this talk. So this talk is focused on primarily the role of communication in social change, and I have chosen to highlight the role of agency. I have looked at agency in conjunction with empowerment since 2008, 2009. This is a sort of approximate timeline of working with concepts, what you have now on the slide. And also in conjunction with voice. But I also put these concepts on the slide for a different reason. When my colleagues, Joe Taki and Thomas Tufte, from the Institute for Creative Futures, invited me to contribute a chapter in this book called, edited collection called Communicating for Change, Concepts to Think With, I came to realize how important concepts are for us as communication researchers working in interdisciplinary contexts. But yet again, a little bit about around the same time, I also came to appreciate that the importance of our points of view, our paradigmatic points of view, predates and at times exceeds the importance of the concepts. So in other words, we can conceptualize agency differently according to, for instance, an ecological perspective, an assemblage perspective, but these are kindred, very kindred points of view, paradigms that you have here on the page. But if we compare with the way we might conceptualize communication processes or agency in other paradigms, like the positivist paradigm and so on, others where the distance is very big, you might come to appreciate as well and reach this conclusion that it is very important to define the premises for the way we build knowledge and we conduct research. So I'm going to share with you my theoretical reflections and tiny bits of practice that illustrate this all around this concept of communicative assemblages. So the assemblage paradigm, the assemblage perspective will be my own point of view during the rest of this talk. And some of the projects that I have chosen to illustrate some of these theoretical reflections go back to 2016 and until the most recent that has just been completed in October, Star Path. All these projects have something in common. They are about young people, communication, and social change. And they all have a more or less direct interest and coverage of agency. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about each project when I introduce it, but just to anticipate that I know obviously your interest is also very much in education, and there is an educational component in all of these projects, especially in the first two. In the first, EduMap, the long name being Access to Adult Education for Young People at Risk of Social Exclusion, we were looking at how to improve access to education for young people at risk, young people in vulnerable positions. So that was about adult education. Connect to Aspire was focusing on lifelong learning and the role of cultural and creative and community spaces in catering for young people's aspirations and needs. And finally, Star Path. I'm going to use this as an example, especially in the second part on methods. In Star Path, which was a small pilot project in 2024, it was a collaboration with Portsmouth University, actually with Isabella Rega, Professor Isabella Rega, and we tested a toolkit for mapping aspirations of young refugees. There is an educational component here as well, because we are trying to understand the role of aspirations in driving motivation and helping young people make choices with respect to higher education access in severely disadvantaged environments such as refugee camps. Now, because the talk will be quite theoretically dense, I'm going to use examples, but might be quite theoretically dense. I'm going to give away from the beginning what is the main takeaway and the conclusion of the talk. So in one phrase, my theoretical proposition is that agency is an emergent property of social and communicative assemblages. It seems like a very simple sort of proposition. So part of the talk is going to look at what do we actually mean by agency as an emergent property of social and communicative assemblages. Obviously, what are social and communicative assemblages? And then what are the implications? And how do we study this sort of assemblages, this sort of very complex assemblages? Okay, so I'm going to come back every once in a while to this phrase. And I will now start by fleshing it out, making it clear. I have told you that I have purposefully included in my research an explicit acknowledgement of the paradigmatic beliefs that are guiding my thinking. And I have started with ecological thinking, which was a big aha moment. I think many of you are very well aware about the main tenets of ecological thinking. And then I have started juggling with assemblage theory as well. Now, they, to my mind, share a lot of principles, but they are also very different. Historically, they have been developed differently. There is a lot more work, research that has gone into ecological thinking. It also goes into many disciplines. It also goes by different names, so systems thinking, dynamic systems thinking. So in my own work, I have worked to apply ecological thinking to social sciences and then to communication sciences. This will no doubt be known to many of you, but as a starting point to introduce ecological thinking, or what keeps together all these very complex array of ideas, of beliefs, of principles that I call here ecological thinking, I'm using this phrase from Fritjof Capra and Luigi Luisi from their Systems Thinking book of 2014. They propose ecological thinking as an alternative to the mechanistic paradigm. And I like the way they describe it in this very simple phrase, having as metaphors the machine for the mechanistic paradigm and the network for the ecological paradigm. So the difference is between the parts and the whole, and the emphasis on the parts, which also means fragmentation for analysis, reducing to discrete parts. This is the method of the mechanistic paradigm, which has for decades, for centuries, also been embraced in social sciences. And as an alternative, we have a paradigm that puts an emphasis on the whole, on the organismic or the ecological. So the holistic perspective has become known as systemic, and the way of thinking it applies systems thinking. So that comes from Capra and Luisi. I'm going to list here these principles that come, I have put them in table format, but all the thinking comes from Capra and Luisi's book, because I consider it necessary to introduce it here, but then I will flesh it out in the methods part of the talk. This sort of division, this clearly cut division between a mechanistic paradigm and the ecological paradigm with respect to the degree to which they are discipline specific, the focus of the analysis falling on objects for the mechanistic paradigm and falling on relationships. So we are going to talk later on about mapping as the method that I have come to privilege and use, and how I have developed it in my work. But you can see here how important it is featuring here. So instead of measuring, mapping. Why? Because when we measure things that have a precise size or a precise array of attributes. But mapping acknowledges that there are no definite standalone attributes of discrete objects, but rather relationships and properties that change in interaction between parts and wholes. And another highlight I'd like to make here is that between objective science and epistemic science. So my point of view here is as well, and that's why I am divulging, I am making explicit my point of view, which is my view of communicative assemblages of communication and social change is rooted in this very clear perspective. So it needs to be acknowledged. Now, assemblage theory might embrace many of the principles, but for myself as a communication researcher has been incredibly rewarding as a way of thinking, as a way of researching, as a theoretical tool, because it was incredibly generative. So perhaps if I should summarize, and it is a subjective point of view that I'm happy to discuss in the Q&A, if I should summarize the difference that it makes when I'm choosing to work with communicative assemblages, for instance, as a concept, and not with communicative ecologies, though I am working with both, is that assemblage theory, at least the way it has been It has been conceptualized in the Landa's book, 2006 book, A New Philosophy of Society, and then his 2016 follow-up book. Basically, it's a very keen and very systematic description of reality, of social reality from an assemblage viewpoint, which is difficult to find in ecological scholarship. And some of those very neat concepts that the Landa uses, I'm going to show how I have applied them to communication theory. But what is assemblage theory? So the Landa offers this, describes his take on assemblage theory as a realist social ontology framework that has the advantage to cover seamlessly macro to micro levels of social reality. So we are going to come back here to this idea of being able to cover macro to micro, which is a big problem in social science research, right? Jumping between one level or scale to the other, and how assemblage theory does this. I'm going to come back to this point when I talk about agency and how a distributed view of agency also is able to cut through this point. So we're going to see an analysis of agency at individual level and then agency at collective level in a community. Assemblages then are wholes whose properties emerge from interactions between parts. So see, pretty much like in ecological theory, nothing different here, and can be used to model intermediate entities. So we can speak about interpersonal networks or institutional organizations, social justice movements that may be fleeting or sometimes enduring, central governments as assemblages, cities as assemblages of people, and so on. There is one important aspect that I'm going to come back in the analysis section. By the way, as a parenthesis, assemblage theory is big, it's huge, it's applied in many disciplines. In here, I'm just highlighting a few aspects that I'm directly going to bring back in the analysis in the talk. So assemblages are come to be through recurrent processes of assembly that include territorialization and coding, which lead assemblages to acquire properties from the interaction of components, from capacities. So this process of territorialization is very important in assemblage scholarship. These are processes that uplift internal homogeneity, and the boundaries are more solid, like in highly territorialized communities are communities that have solid identities and boundaries, people that are either in or out membership, or there are strict boundaries for membership. And there is this process, so this is what I'm talking about, the key process that is important in how assemblages come to be, how territorialization comes to be. The key process is habitual repetition. So these things happen in time. They happen through repeated interaction, through repeated engagement in assemblages. Now I'm going to zoom in more on communicative assemblages and agency. I have told you before that I've been working with communicative ecologies, and then I have chosen to also flesh out the communicative assemblages concept. So I've done quite a bit of work with my colleague in the Institute for Creative Futures, Joe Taki, on communicative ecologies with its own method called communicative ecologies mapping. But this is not the only ecological framework in communication studies. This is what you have on the slide is one way to categorize all these ecologies frameworks around, the ones in communication studies, according to the focus they have. So some of them have a focus on the tools, on the media, such as in media ecology. Others have a focus on the informative content, such as information ecology. That's an old one from Nardi and O'Day, key work of Nardi and O'Day on information ecology. And others have a focus on the wholeness of the communicative context. So they might be looking at the interrelatedness of socialization, networking, and information exchanges. And here we have communicative ecologies. Taki and Joe Taki and myself, we have been working on this, but also people like most recently Valentina Bau, Harlem Foss. They also have a very clear concept of communicative ecology split in layers. And tiny difference in the work of Alteide and Broad et al. They speak about communication ecologies. Now, of course, what does communicative assemblages bring over and above the communicative ecologies framework? So now I'm starting to flesh it out. So I'm fleshing it out always citing, so to say, always giving credit to the work of Manuel de Landa. And I'm going to also use some citations from a work in preparation with Joe Taki that is soon going to be submitted and published. So we define communicative assemblages as social assemblages whose primary purpose is the production and exchange of information, socialization, and networking. So noting here the primary purpose. As such, communicative assemblages can revolve around an individual or a collective. They can be short-term or enduring with fluid or solid identities. While I am talking about communicative assemblages as a concept, actually the proposal is for communicative assemblages to act as a heuristic tool to shed light first on the communicative function of social assemblages. So the analytical focus is slightly different, point 1 and point 2. First of all, we purport that the social assemblages might have communicative function, even if they are not strictly or only related with communication, but we can trace communication assemblages nested around other social assemblages. But there are also specialized assemblies of components with a primary function of information production and exchange, which might rely on codified registers such as language and socially conditioned values, rules, and norms. For analytical purposes, we distinguish three, why it is very reductionist to call them layers or dimensions or components, because all of these are also assemblages, but I'm going to highlight them for analytical purposes, and they become very important when analyzing communicative assemblages in practice in a project. And these are social, dimension or layer, but again, assemblage, so social, informational, and media. Starting with the social, so this might encompass social networks that agents have access to, the social relations that are built around the agent, and the practices, those interaction, information exchange, socialization practices that agents engage in and bring them in context with these assemblages. But can also encompass, or at least at analytical level, it is also important to take into consideration the social norms, rules, constraints, and values that regulate and guide social interaction. The second one is the informative layer. So this is about the content of the informational or communicative act, which might be analyzed to refer to the meanings conveyed by the agent, but also we need to take into account the way these meanings are codified or represented. They might be using a certain style, a certain register. We are going to see how we distinguish between, for instance, formal communication assemblages and informal communication assemblages in the way young people in a severely disadvantaged neighborhood in Bucharest are organizing their way of talking and the information that they receive and they exchange. So it's important to look at this dimension of representation, the way information is represented. And finally, media. There is no need for me to explain what media assemblages are. What is important to note is that we refer here to the media component, different of communicative assemblages, distinguished from the social component and distinguished from the informative component. In here, one way to flesh out better the communicative assemblages heuristic tool is by referring to each of those sub-assemblages, if you wish, for a lack of a better term, with respect to two axes. The first moving from expressive to material. So in other words, some communicative assemblages or some components of communicative assemblages might have a purely expressive function, and some might have a materiality attached to them. So examples of material components might be communication tools and devices, infrastructures, but also the bodies, our own bodies. And then there are examples of expressive components like the content of a conversation, facial expressions, meanings, and so on. The second important axis where we can characterize communicative assemblages goes from territorialization to deterritorialization. And this regards the boundaries of an assemblage and its degree of internal homogeneity, also its identity. There come to mind that this is a very important point, and it's important also how we refer to the processes of territorialization and deterritorialization. Depending on the point of view, for instance, we might look at how a specific media affordance might be more prone to engendering territorialization processes or deterritorialization. For instance, spoken word, orality, this brings us together, contributes to territorialization and to stronger boundaries and situated communicative acts. Whereas communication, digital communication, social media contribute to deterritorialization in situated interaction, though we might speak of territorializing digital spheres. So we have a lot of analytical freedom to employ this, but it is that's one of the affordances of the assemblage theory that I was talking about previously. So I would not have been able to think about communicative ecologies in this way, in this very systematic way, even if these discourses are pertinent also to communicative ecology scholarship. But here they are a lot more clear when we have this very systematic take on communicative assemblages using these features. Now I'm moving on to agency, and briefly, right. The view of agency that I'm introducing in this talk, on the one hand, draws on the work of Bruno Latour and Don Slater, where agency is distributed in networks composed of agents, resources, and tools, but it is also faithful to the concept of Amartya Sen, going back to 1985, one of the best definitions of agency, what a person is free to do and achieve in pursuit of whatever goals or values he or she regards as important. So what I'm proposing is that an assemblage point of view, an assemblage perspective, helps us to reconcile an agent-focused and a distributed view of agency. So now I'm going to flesh out agency as emergent property of social and communicative assemblages. We've talked about communicative assemblages, we've talked about social assemblages, and also about agency, but what are emergent properties? As a matter of fact, emergent properties feature very importantly both in ecologies and assemblages scholarship. So Capra and Luis's book from 2014 mention also the history of using the word emergent properties, going back to the 1920s to the philosopher C.D. Broad, who coined the term to talk about those properties that emerge, so emerge in interaction at a certain level of complexity, but might not be important at other levels. So the example is like temperature. We can speak about temperature at a certain scale or level of complexity, but at subatomic, it's not relevant anymore. The way the Landa defines emergent properties is also quite clear. So he speaks about assemblages or having capacities to interact, or entities having capacities to interact and not defined properties. The properties actually emerge the moment an entity interacts with other entities or with assemblages or other assemblages, and those capacities are honed until they become properties that can be actually analyzed as such. The example being a piece of obsidian, which has the capacity to cut, but then in a knife, it's clear it has this as a feature, it's made for cutting. Another important point regards causality in social assemblages, and in here, with direct applicability to the study of agency, it is very important to acknowledge that we cannot speak about linear causality such as A influences B if we take a distributed view of agency, because we need to acknowledge that multiple factors come into being when something changes or when an agent develops capacity to change. And also that causality is multi-scaled. So we need to take into account how different factors come and influence a certain phenomenon at different scales. There is one more aspect which is important for social action, as different from mere biological action or biological causality, that we need to take into account the values or personal emotions or motives that people might hold and which are important in understanding processes of causality of change. Now I'm moving, I am trying to wrap this up in more or less 7, 8 to 10 minutes. I am moving in the analysis part. And the analysis part is going to use as drivers 3 analytical lines to analyze agency as emergent property of social and communicative assemblages. So the first is goal setting. So in the view I endorse, goal setting is the dimension that links an agent focus and the distributed view of agency. So I'm going to flesh this out. And then the second is 2 analytical lines are about how agents build agency to act for change. And in here, we are going to refer how these goals act as mobilizing factors for the use of resources towards social action. And we are talking about communicative resources. Okay, so our focus is always communication. And finally, the third analytical line regards the role of repeated engagement in specialized social and communicative assemblages in sustaining competence and identity building. I have briefly introduced EduMap before, and I should say that I'm jumping straight into one of the work packages of EduMap, which was much bigger European Horizon 2020 project. Our task, I was involved in it with Joe Taki, my colleague. Our task was to study the communicative ecologies of young people at risk of social exclusion and communicative ecologies of adult education providers in order to understand matches, mismatches, and new lines for intervention. Now I'm going to zoom in even more on the EduMap and look at one of the communities that was involved in the study. It was a community of Roma living in a marginalized, severely deprived neighborhood in Bucharest. And our focus was on young Roma and how they could access or did access, if at all, adult education and their needs. I'm talking about a context that was severely deprived with multiple layers of vulnerability for young people, so lack of literacy, marginalization, poverty, and even extreme poverty, lack of electricity, poor sanitation standards, and so on. So in the interest of time, I'm going now to summarize here one part of the findings that relate to agency. So I told you at the beginning of the talk that one of the advantages of using communicative assemblages as a concept and assemblage theory is that we can link between scales, between levels of analysis. So what we are looking at here on the slide is the clusters of assemblages, of communicative assemblages that we have studied at the level of the community. So the Roma community in a neighborhood in Bucharest, Romania. So we isolated these dimensions of the assemblages. The social dimension in here, we understood that there was a very important distinction between formal and informal communication contexts, and that young people were also, with respect to media, using different sorts of media to engage in formal or informal communication. For instance, they were all using social media, but they were not using social media for getting information about jobs or other formal communication practices. With respect to goals, this very important goal setting dimension, what came out is that the key goals in the community were very much influenced by poverty and discrimination. So there was a very short-term horizon with respect to goal setting, where the young people with whom we have worked and researched, they were mainly interested to meet immediate needs. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to put this into relationship with the communicative assemblages of one education provider in Bucharest to try to highlight what we found out through this project, the matches and the mismatches. So what you have now here on the page is a synthesis of a report, basically, on how an adult education provider in Bucharest was mobilizing resources, communicative resources, in order to communicate with young people at the level of recruitment. So we created maps like this for design of education programs, recruitment of young people, delivery and post-delivery with alumni. So what we were looking was to what extent there were matches and mismatches between these, so the recruitment level of the assemblages, and how young people in that deprived Roma neighborhood could be touched by this communication. So one flashlight takeaway here from this slide is that that particular education provider made little use of informal communication. They were relying on networks and partnerships in order to reach out to young people in need. So young people were being referred to them. So then obviously, in order to reach out to those young people in need in that Bucharest neighborhood, there would have needed to be a mediating company to fill that gap. They didn't do informal networks, they didn't do social media. So there wasn't very little probability for young people to reach out directly to this without the mediation of another organization. Okay, so that was the collective level of communicative assemblages. And now I'm going to jump to the individual level of agency, and I'm going to share with you a story of change that we analyzed at the 3 levels that I have shared with you before. It's one of the most poignant, impressive stories of change that I have had the privilege to witness in my ethnographic research. So Adina was 33 years old when interviewed. She had 3 children, and she was working for a community education provider in the Bucharest neighborhood I introduced, but she was also a co-founder of a community center. Years before, she had been addicted to drugs, to heroin, and her life-changing event, the one that we analyzed, so the beginning of her spiral of change, happened when she was visiting a hospital with her girlfriend to help her cope with heroin withdrawal, where she saw a mother, a substance abuser herself, holding a child in her arms. Driven by this deep desire to help the young mother, Adina mobilized her existing networks and then others. And little by little, a spiral of change started to take effect in her life. Now I'm going to briefly analyze this spiral of change at the 3 levels. So the first, goal setting. It is important to look at goal setting with a personal dimension and also a social forging or a social dimension, meaning that strong, life-changing goals, the ones that can build agency, the ones that are conducive to agency expansion, have first this important personal dimension where they may be based on strongly felt motives and deliberate choice. For instance, Adina, she said that is coming from her interview and her communicative ecologies map. I felt something in myself. I could do something for people when the young mother that she helped came back with her life completely reshuffled, completely set in order, and she was the engine of that change. So then Adina felt compelled to do more of this social good. But there was also the social dimension of goal setting. Adina could not have done this without others. So the mere personal motive was not enough. So she started engaging in social and communicative assemblages that were previously not familiar to her. Social workers, community activists, community educators. So she started nurturing relationships, dialogues with these people, joining communities, and this helped for her consolidate this goal and ultimately open up community center. So that is the second level of analysis, how this very strong goal was shaped, honed in interaction with specialized assemblages and helped Adina to mobilize resources towards social action. And in here, I'm going to make just one highlight. There would be more, but in the interest of time, I will have to close soon. I'd like to highlight something that goes back to the assemblage principles of or observation around territorialization and deterritorialization, and the importance of cultivating assemblages that might evolve. So what we have in the case of Adina is an evolution of communicative assemblages from sporadic exchanges in a hospital yard to gradually cohesive interpersonal networks, including people outside her community. So we can analyze this in so many ways. Of course, we can analyze this in terms of the strengths of weak ties, but also in bringing in the ideas of dynamic stability, assemblages that have fluid identities. So even if Adina before would not have conceived of mingling with social activists, she made this passage in new assemblages that gradually concretized new identities. So she also developed an identity herself as a community change agent. And the important role, I would like to highlight here, the important role of habitual repetition. So constant interaction in communication terms, spanning different media and platforms. Right, so I will conclude here. The part on method is something that will be for another talk. But my conclusion would be that, and that comes from the article we are about to submit with my colleague Joe Taki, that a critical component of the relationship between communication and social change resides in a fine balance between the agent's goals or intentions, which are key components of agency, according to Amartya Sen scholarship, and the degree to which these are sustained by supportive networks in their environment. So that's the beginning of the spiral of change, the way the goals are shaped, and then it unfolds. The analysis becomes a lot more complex. What sort of assemblages, what type of assemblages, how are their identities, what role media plays, what role social plays, are they inside or outside the community? So it's really a treasure trove for a communication researcher working with communicative assemblages. I am stopping here and I am opening it up for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Amalia. So interesting. I could ask you 100 questions myself, but I'm going to give other people the opportunity. So I know Pete has some questions and then Uma as well. So Pete, do you want to go first, either with one of yours or if you can combine them?
Yeah, just really fascinating talk. Thanks very much. Really stimulating. I've been reading Donna Haraway, and I think that what she was writing in the 90s is very pertinent to what you're talking about. She has this phrase, materialized refiguration. And I think that what you're proposing is materialized refiguration. Something has to be done. I just wonder about the problem, and somebody else raised it, maybe clearer than me. The problem with Lefebvre talks about the production of space. It's how do you create spaces, or how do you facilitate the creation of spaces by people who are emerging agents? The thing about agency as an emergent property is, at what point do you become an agent?
Can I answer?
Yeah, please. Sorry.
So first of all, I'm happy you brought in Donna Haraway. I was familiar with her work in a different incarnation of my research, which was more about technology and also culture and human-computer interaction. I was not familiar with this phrase, refiguration, materialized refiguration.
Yeah.
So I will just go back to Donna Haraway's work. So I'm really glad that she continues to be so relevant. With respect to your question, this is a very pertinent question, and that's actually one of the questions that drove me to switch from communicative ecologies to communicative assemblages. And the answer is this: goals, intentionality are critically important. When I was purely in a communicative ecology scholarship, I was just describing communication worlds, communication spaces. And I mean, things were changing because we are talking about process. We are talking about things being in perpetual motion. That's ecological scholarship. But this did not help me elucidate what happens in social action, what happens when in communication and social change sort of research projects. So the assemblages, for me, the stepping stone from ecologies to assemblages was basically goal setting. Now I found a better word, you might know more about it, which is intention or intentionality, but I did not bring it here because I'm just beginning to unravel what this concept might, hide beneath. But this is the short answer for me.
Thanks very much. I just want to pick one more second. It's interesting that Haraway is very much with you. She says there's textual rereading is never enough. We need to get at the way in which worlds are made. And I think that that's what you're talking about, isn't it?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you
that's
very
really
much.
good. It's been really stimulating. Thanks. Really
Thank you.
enjoyed it.
Thank you, Pete.
Thanks, Pete. Uma, do you want to ask your question? Hi.
I'm not sure it's a question, it's a kind of reflection. Thank you very much. Really interesting talk. And my reflection is that I did something on a very broad question like yours, which is my question was, what is technology enhanced learning and where does it come from? And it was an archival study. And I started off with Latour and Law, drawing on Deleuze, but I couldn't make sense of it until I used Foucault. And the reason was because power, Foucault's notion of power is embedded. It's everywhere within the knowledge. It's not a thing which people have or don't have. It's within networks. So I thought that there is an interesting thing that's kind of like I know we don't use word levels, but an interesting different take on your data and your analysis, which is that how did these women become empowered? And what's stopping them from taking it further? That kind of a space which I'm quite interested in. So
Thank you very much for this question. I actually had it on the slide, but there was no time to cover it. So that was the third level of analysis. So in agency and empowerment, clearly they come together, right? And that's how I reach out to them and I studied them. And Amartya Sen has two dimensions that are clearly connected in the exercise of agency, and power and control. So these are the two, power and control. In the analysis that has been done from an assemblages point of view, exactly, so I would say exactly as you have said, the proposition is that power and control are also embedded. They are also embedded. They are never within one agent. So the whole value of social and communicative assemblages analysis is to understand these processes by which power and control, though being embedded, do become the requisite or are taken up by agents, or somehow are making a difference for young people that are in need. Let me find a more clear way to put this. In Adina's example, of course, we can say that she was disempowered. She had little power around herself, but she was a strong woman. But as long as she was in an environment where things did not change, there was a spiral of poverty and so on, she needed to engage in new assemblages in order to connect to new ways of manifesting power over her own life. That power came from new knowledge, new skills as a community educator, new networks, and of course, new confidence and new identity as a community change agent. So this is why I think when you said before that your reading was that power is distributed, is embedded, that's also how I see it. But the process of analyzing it is not so immediate. We cannot put it in a mathematical equation. We are talking about very complex processes. But yes, I would say I would agree with you. Sorry, that was a bit of a convoluted answer.
It was a convoluted question or statement. Thank you. That was interesting.
Thank you. And that's a good way to finish today and a good way to conclude our speaker series for this semester with a convoluted question and convoluted answer.
Thank you, Julian.
Thanks everybody so much. We always finish dead on 3 o'clock because we do respect the fact that our speakers give us their time for free, and we really appreciate it. We don't want to take up more time than we've requested of them. So I'd just like to say again, thank you so much, Amalia, for that work. Some people asked about methods, and I just have replied. I'll follow up with Andrea separately to say that Amalia ran a methods workshop related to the communications aspirations work previously for our Ed D, and we do have a recording of that. So if people are interested, they can contact me. I can send them a link to that as well. So thank you again, Amalia. Thank you everybody for engaging with the speaker series over this semester and for today. MA students, we will follow up tomorrow. And I wish all of you a happy remaining Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.